And I think as a last point, I think this is the most unfortunate element of the whole debate, is that space for reasoned discussion kind of died. And I'm happy to be here on a panel with people who are writers, because print media is one of the last places where you're really getting sustained and serious and thoughtful discussion on these topics, whether you're on the right or the left. And having attended a lot of the community board meetings, one thing that always struck me is that the people who were most directly affected, people who actually lived in the area, whether they were opposed or in favor, were generally drowned out. So people who had objections to the center, not for reasons that they were racist or bigoted or Islamophobic, they just had issues or questions or concerns, couldn't be heard because the loudest voices in the room triumphed. And what has happened is that over the last 4 months, we never really had the conversation we should have had because we just got shouting matches. And things have now died down quite a bit. It's not in the news every 14 minutes, which is kind of a good thing, I think, because it allows for some level of sanity. And hopefully tonight we can have that kind of discussion. And hopefully we can better understand both the Muslim view of what's happening and also what's going on in the Muslim community during this whole period. And hopefully that's something I can contribute.
Thank you, Arun. I'd now like to ask all of you in the audience if you have any questions about anything you just heard or about the question that was posed to these panelists.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question of the gentleman from the Manhattan Institute. I'd just like to start by saying that there's a Gurdwara in my neighborhood where various Sikhs who live in Staten Island travel to pray, and for the most part, it's very tranquil. There have been no objections, no vociferous debates, no people casting aspersions upon the operators of this Sikh temple. And I was wondering if you believe that there's something that Imam Faisal Rayouf and other people behind the center have done to provoke this very admittedly volatile, very contentious debate. That they bear a certain responsibility, just as some people would accuse the opponents of the mosque of being ignorant of Islam. Perhaps the people who were responsible for bringing this issue before Imam Rayouf and the Park 51 people collaborating in this project, whether they bear a certain responsibility for the contentious debate we've been having over the past several months.
So I'm going to answer that eagerly because you called me gentleman, which nobody does, so thanks for that. That's very cool. I think that it was not handled well. And that's not to speak to the merits of the project, it's to speak to the fact that people should think before they do things. This is very good advice in general, especially if you're a student. Think very hard before you do anything, including take a class, because I may be the teacher. I don't know what that means, I have no idea. I think there are a lot of people who are active within the American Muslim community who don't really bother to talk to a lot of Muslims and who don't really attempt to engage with a lot of people outside their own circle. So Imam Faisal is a very big name in interfaith circles in Manhattan. I live in Manhattan, so I'm not hating on Manhattan. But that is a limited audience, to say the least. And I guess I'll say this, and this goes to Abe's point, which I think is a very interesting point, a very deep issue that we need to think about as a country and as a culture, is that democracy kind of just tells us what we can and can't do in broad outline, right? That's how our Constitution works. It sort of sets up the boundaries of the game, but it kind of leaves it up to us to fill in the content. Are we left-wing, are we right-wing, are we Christian, are we secular, are we atheist, whatever, right? So, as everyone said, you have the right to do anything you want, basically, as long as you don't literally, commit treason or engage in acts of violence. I mean, you can do pretty much anything you want. You can wear your clothes on backwards, you can scream in, the middle of the street. I mean, it's New York, people do it all the time. It's fine. The question is, where does religion come into play, right? And what's the ethical thing to do? Now, I want to phrase this very carefully, so I'm not ducking the question, I'm just thinking about how to say it. If you hurt me very badly, I may not have a rational reason to be traumatized by that 15 years later. And I'm just saying if you insulted me. If someone from a certain population killed someone in my family or took a loved one or hurt someone, it's quite understandable that people for a long time might hold a certain animosity towards that group. They may not even want to. They may know rationally that a Muslim here is not a Muslim over there. If you see what I'm saying, there's a differentiation. But we know that people who go through trauma, people who go through pain, people who live through wars, who live through riots, they are imprinted with that because of what they're forced to undergo. And it's one thing for me to say, I'm a Muslim, don't associate me with an extremist over there. And someone can rationally understand that, but emotionally it'll still hurt. And I don't think a very good job was done to understand how people might perceive Islam because of the pain directly or indirectly caused in the name of Islam by a certain group of people. And again, that doesn't speak to whether or not you should do it. You can do it. It gets to the question of should you do it. What is the role of a religious group, of an ethical voice in a democracy? Right? I can make a Quran making fun of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but should I? It's incredibly insensitive. It's also ironic and deeply hypocritical that many of the loudest voices against the mosque were all, putting up cartoons making fun of the Prophet Muhammad on their blogs, saying we have the right to do whatever we want. And then when their own feelings are hurt, suddenly they have a different standard. I'm saying that we should have a consistent standard. Not because it's something we have to do legally, but it's something we should do morally. If something is going to hurt someone, we should think very carefully about what we're doing, whether it's the right thing to do, and how it could be done in a different way. And maybe, I don't think ultimately it's their fault insofar as the conversation very quickly spun out of control. And, within a few days, it was suddenly a massive PR onslaught that, it was a very coordinated national campaign. It was really coming from certain power centers, certain funders. It was a big push back. Now, I don't know how, if you're a local group with not a lot of money, you're going to push back against that or even tell your story in that situation. But, why are we in that situation? That's a question that a lot of people have to ask. And again, just to make the distinction, it doesn't mean that the situation is okay. It's not fair that I'm being assumed to be somehow, suspect because I'm Muslim, but it's a reality. And we can work to undo the reality, but we have to accept where we're starting from. I don't know if that gets to your question. Because I feel like there's a lot going on in the issue and in the question, so I don't know how exactly to get at it. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very full answer. And
yes,
if you would like to continue the question towards the end of this, that would be great. But right now I'd like to see if there's any other questions in the audience at this point. Please.
I can speak. I have a question here, right? First, thank you. I think all three of you have really intelligent, well thought out comments. So thank you for making the trek to Staten Island. I would just ask you all to respond to a poll that said that 70% of New Yorkers oppose the mosque. Just how would I'm sure that poll was taken after the discussion was elevated to a somewhat irrational level. But if it is a local issue and 70% of New Yorkers are opposed to it, where do we go from there?
I'm going to ask that you hold that question to the end of this because it is an entirely different question that we would like all three of them to respond to. If you have a question that relates to the responses they just gave, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll entertain that in a little while.
Laura?
Yes.
Can you also have, when people ask questions, have them introduce themselves?
That would be wonderful. Thank you. Devorah Lieberman, our provost, has just asked that when you ask a question, if you would introduce yourselves, we would appreciate it.